Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the life of a pretty incredible person, Malala Yousafzai.
She's definitely one of the most inspiring figures of our time, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I mean, how many people do you know who stood up to the Taliban for, well, for anything, let alone something as basic as education?
Yeah, that takes serious courage, especially at such a young age.
Exactly. And her book, I Am Malala, doesn't just tell that story. It's like a window into a world that most of us can only imagine. Swat Valley, before, during, and after the Taliban's rise to power.
You get a real sense of what life was like for ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. It's pretty powerful.
So where do we even begin with a story as complex as Malala's?
Well, like any good story, I think we should start at the beginning.
Okay, so Malala was born in 1997 in Swat Valley, Pakistan, right? But here's the thing. Being born a girl in that culture wasn't always, no, celebrated.
Right. Malala herself describes this tradition where people fire rifles to celebrate the birth of a son, but daughters are kind of, hidden away.
It's tough to hear that, honestly.
It is. It makes you realize just how different her upbringing could have been.
Especially when you consider her father, Ziauddin Yousafzai.
Oh, he was a force to be reckoned with, wasn't he? Totally defied those cultural norms when it came to Malala.
He was over the moon when she was born.
I know. Not only did he celebrate her arrival, but he named her after a Pashtun heroine, Malai of Maiwand, a warrior.
Talk about setting the stage.
And then get this, he added her name to the family tree.
Whoa, wait, they don't traditionally do that for girls, right?
Nope, that was unheard of.
That's a powerful statement right there.
Right. Like he was saying, my daughter is just as important as any son. Her story matters.
It makes you think, did he somehow know, even back then, that Malala would go on to do extraordinary things?
It's hard not to see it as some kind of like foreshadowing, isn't it?
Totally. But before we jump too far ahead, I think we need to understand the world Malala was born into. And she paints such a vivid picture of Swat Valley in her book.
Right. She describes it as this incredible paradise, almost like a hidden Shangri-La. She even calls it the Switzerland of the East.
Seriously.
Yeah.
With towering mountains, crystal clear rivers. It sounds idyllic.
And the culture itself is so rich. There's which basically means honor.
And they had these tribal councils called jirgas, right? And the madrasas, which are these religious schools. It's a whole different way of life.
It really is. And understanding all of that makes the Taliban's takeover even more tragic, I think. Because it wasn't just about territory. It was about tearing apart a whole culture.
Yeah, when you put it that way, it's heartbreaking.
It is. But before we dive into the darker parts of Malala's story, I think it's worth talking about something really positive.
Oh, you mean the influence of education?
Exactly. It played such a huge role in Malala's family, especially for her father.
He was like woven into their very being.
And, Ziauddin himself had to fight tooth and nail for his own education. He faced poverty, societal barriers.
It's incredible he achieved as much as he did, given the circumstances.
It is. And all those experiences really shaped his determination to make sure Malala and all girls had access to the education he was denied.
That's so inspiring. He didn't just talk the talk either.
Not at all. He put his money where his mouth was and founded his own school.
The Kushal School, right?
That's the one. And it wasn't easy. Malala talks about how some people ridiculed Ziauddin for starting a school for girls. Even school superintendent mocked him.
But he didn't give up.
Not a chance. He even gave away free spots to over 100 kids, many of whom came from this area Malala calls Rubbish Mountain, where people were literally scavenging to survive.
That's some serious dedication. Talk about putting your beliefs into action.
Right. And imagine growing up in that environment, surrounded by those values. It's no wonder Malala became such a passionate advocate for education.
Absolutely. She learned from the best. But unfortunately, her peaceful world wouldn't stay that way forever.
It's crazy to think how quickly things changed in Swat Valley. Like, one minute it's this peaceful paradise, and the next...
Like a storm cloud rolling in, right? Malala describes it as this gradual shift. Little things at first,
Oh, I remember that part. She talks about seeing more men with beards, fewer women out in public, like signs that something was off, but maybe not enough to, raise major alarm bells at first.
Right. It's easy to overlook those subtle changes, especially when you're busy living your life.
Totally. And then you have this guy, Maulana Fazlullah, who starts broadcasting on the radio.
The radio mullah, right? His voice still gives me chills.
Oh, he was scary. It wasn't just about religion either. He was openly calling for violence.
And specifically targeting women.
Hmm.
right? It's hard to imagine living with that kind of fear and intimidation day in and day out.
It must have been terrifying just turning on the radio and hearing that. Like, you could never escape it.
And like, Malala was just a kid. She was what, like 10 or 11 when all this started happening?
Right. And she writes about having to hide her school books, not being able to listen to music. Like, even the simple joys of childhood were being stripped away.
And I think that's what makes Malala's story so impactful. It's not just about politics or religion. It's about a young girl's life being turned upside down.
Exactly. It's personal. It makes you really feel the human cost of extremism and oppression.
It's one thing to hear about the Taliban in the news, but it's another to hear a young girl describe what it was actually like to live under their rule.
Right. It's like you're right there with her, experiencing it firsthand.
And what's really amazing is that even in the face of all that fear and intimidation, Malala and her father refused to be silenced.
Ziauddin was incredible. He spoke out at public events, criticizing the Taliban, even though he knew it was dangerous.
Seriously, like how much guts does that take?
It's inspiring, isn't it? He could have easily kept his head down, but he knew he had to do something.
It's like he realized that if good people stay silent, evil wins. Or something like that.
Exactly. And that's where Malala's activism really starts to take shape.
Wait, were you talking about her blog?
Yep. She was just 11 years old when she started writing for the BBC under the pseudonym Gul Mackay.
Wow, 11. I can barely remember what I was doing at 11, let alone having the courage to write about something as dangerous as the Taliban.
She's amazing, and her diary entries are so powerful. She writes about her fear, her anger, but also her unwavering belief in the importance of education.
Yeah, it's incredible how, even amidst all that chaos, she never lost sight of what mattered most to her.
It's like her passion for learning became this source of strength and defiance in the face of oppression.
Right. It's almost like the Taliban's attempts to silence her just made her voice stronger.
And that, of course, is what ultimately made her a target.
Because, dictators and extremists and those kinds of people, they can't stand anyone who questions their authority.
Absolutely. They want total control, and a young girl speaking out about the importance of education was like a direct threat to that control.
And that brings us to the attack, one of the darkest moments in Malala's story.
I think we all remember where we were when we heard the news. A school bus, a group of girls on their way home. It's unfathomable.
Yeah, I don't think we need to go into the graphic details here. It's still hard to process, even all these years later.
It is. But what's even more incredible is that Malala survived. And not just survived, but used that horrific experience to amplify her message on a global scale.
She's truly an inspiration, and I think a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can prevail.
It's easy to think that once the Taliban was driven out of SWAT, everything went back to normal.
Yeah, like a happy ending.
Exactly. But Malala's story shows us that it wasn't that simple.
The scars run deep.
They do. She talks about the lingering fear, the threats that continued even after the Taliban was gone.
It makes sense, though, right? It's like, how can you just forget something like that? How can you just go back to life as it was before?
It's trauma. Plain and simple. Then there's the whole political landscape to consider.
Oh, right. The Pakistani government, the military, all those moving parts.
Yeah. Malala even describes a meeting she had with a Pakistani general, and you get a sense of how complicated everything was.
I remember that part. It
Yeah.
felt like there were so many layers to the conflict.
Right. It wasn't just a clear-cut good versus evil situation. There were all these different factions, different agendas at play.
And in the midst of all that, you have Malala, this, teenager who was shot in the head for speaking out.
It's easy to forget how young she was, and suddenly she's this global icon, expected to be this, voice of a generation.
The pressure must have been immense.
Oh, absolutely. And she talks about feeling that pressure, the loneliness of being away from her friends, the challenges of adjusting to a new life in the UK.
It's a good reminder that she's human,
Yeah, she's not just a symbol. She's a real person with real emotions, real struggles.
Which honestly makes her story even more inspiring. Because despite all of that, she never wavered in her commitment to education for girls.
Not for a second. It's like her purpose, her mission in life became even stronger after the attack.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. And it makes me think about all the other girls out there who are facing similar challenges.
The ones whose stories we don't hear.
Exactly. Their struggles are just as real, just as important.
Absolutely. And that's why Malala's story resonates so deeply, I think. Because she's not just fighting for herself, she's fighting for all girls.
She's like a symbol of hope, a reminder that even one voice can make a difference.
And that even in the darkest of times, change is possible.
So what's the biggest takeaway for you? What will you carry with you from Malala's story?
I think it's that sense of hope, that belief that we can all make a difference. Even small actions can have a ripple effect.
Like that quote, right? One child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world.
Exactly. And, it's not just about grand gestures. It's about speaking up for what you believe in, even when it's scary.
Being kind to one another,
Hmm,
educating ourselves about the world. Those things matter.
they do. And they can have a real impact. So, to anyone listening, if you haven't already, I highly recommend reading I Am Malala.
It's a powerful and inspiring story, and one that I think everyone should hear. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the life of Malala Yousafzai.
Until next time.